Today on Rates and Barrels, we discuss a busy weekend around baseball, including appearances at second base from Fernando Tatis Jr. Plus, we go down on the farm with Owen Riley and Maxfield Lane. Let's go! Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Monday, April 13th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris with one key question for Eno. Eno, did you get your taxes done yet?
Got them done.
That's awesome. I mean,
it's a good feeling every spring, dude. It's like the biggest house cleaning. It's like taking a big old dump.
I got mine done. Didn't feel quite like that. Did feel like I took an L. Knew it was coming. Didn't feel like a bodily function necessarily, but I did use that momentum to get some more stuff done around the house this weekend. But that wasn't the best thing that I did or the best thing that I saw. I want to ask you, what's the best thing you saw? You were on the road. You saw some live baseball, and you saw some exciting live baseball.
Yeah, consecutive walk-offs in San Diego. It was a great weekend in San Diego with Xander Bogaerts' walk-off grand slam, followed the next night by another extra innings walk-off, and this time with the entire crowd yelling, "Holy Sheets! Holy Sheets!" And then Gavin Sheets, goes placata and wins the game. So, amazingly, I think the Padres have the third best record, and I'd been wondering, what kind of a season it would be for them. I wouldn't say that a record this far in. By the way, if you do care about such things, and it's about 60 games in where you get signal in the team's record. So I know we'll probably have a show sometime this week where we're talking about teams we are worried about and teams we're not. But generally, I wouldn't look at this record and say the Padres are the third best team in baseball right now.
No, the Twins are tied for the American League lead in wins right now. Do I believe that? No, not really. I mean, everything is still materializing. I was thinking a lot about that this weekend. I mean, the Brewers got swept by the Nationals, which made me a little cranky. But it's like, just happens. Like, teams are banged up already. Like, there's going to be lots of injury talk in the next little while. And just navigating the unique problems you have at the beginning of the season sometimes leads us to believe there are more flaws with the team than there really are, or that there are more things going well than are actually going to go well over the full 162. I have something from the Padres that I thought was maybe the best thing I saw this weekend, just because it was very unexpected. Fernando Tatis Jr. made consecutive starts at second base. What's going on there? I mean, bonus eligibility in fantasy leagues is always nice. Some leagues require 5 in-season appearances to get there, so getting 40% of the way there in one series. I mean, this is a guy that is a platinum glover in right field. Why are the Padres tinkering around? I was looking at the lineup. They gave Xander Bogaerts a day off on Saturday and played Jake Cronenworth at short, which is
yes, I think
also
that
a
is
surprise.
The problem, I mean, it's masking. It's cool. It's fun. I liked it, and he did a good job. I think that's to be expected. He was like a scratch shortstop, and he's still pre-30. So, like, I thought, I thought he could play center, honestly. And I think if you're a platinum right fielder, you can make the argument he plays center. But Merrill's a pretty good center. The problem with the roster construction is that Jake Cronenworth is the backup shortstop, and so and he's the backup shortstop behind a 30-year-old shortstop. So I would have maybe tried. Would have been weird to put Tatis back at short. I don't know. Like, who's a better shortstop right now, him or Jake Cronenworth? I would guess Tatis.
I think Tatis would be better, and also Jake Cronenworth is 32, so he is younger than Xander Bogaerts, who's 33, but. We're still talking about a guy on the wrong side of 30, so
who didn't play shortstop before. So, like, I'd take the guy who had played shortstop and is on the right side of 30. Anyway, still kind of cool, and it just makes me wonder that, like, hey, platinum Gold Glover, like, in right field, and now a really good second baseman while we're running out Bogaerts and Cronenworth the short. Okay, all right.
Because you could solve the Bogaerts problem to some degree if Tatis plays a good shortstop. If you pull the Mookie Betts maneuver with Tatis, which given his age does seem more plausible, even if you
more
don't get to the
plausible
same
than the Mookie
apex.
Betts story. I mean, the Mookie Betts story is one of the weirdest ever.
Even if you don't get to the same peak that Betts showed defensively a year ago at shortstop, it still potentially gives you a better combination of players on the field. So I'm really curious to see how frequently they turn to this plan. I know that shoulder problems for Tatis could be part of the reason why second base makes more sense than short. I get it. There's a lot of moving parts here. But that was just something that kind of caught me off guard this weekend in a good way, right? That's what you like. You like pleasant surprises.
In a better way than the Nats sweeping the Brewers.
It wasn't. The A's swept the Mets, so there's all sorts of weird stuff happening out there right now. And there's lots of injuries, like I mentioned earlier. Nick Pivetta, actually, the downer, I guess, on the Padres weekend is that he had to leave with what they're calling right elbow stiffness on Sunday. I did see in Dennis Lynn's story, he had a similar bout of arm fatigue that cost him a start in spring training, so they're hoping that this is related to that and not an indication of a more serious problem. At this point, I have not seen reports that he's gone for further testing, but it would not be surprising if they have him do that, given the nature of the injury. It's been a good start overall for Pivetta, just in terms of strikeouts, walks. Hasn't given up a homer. 24-6 K to BB in 16 innings. Looks like the guy they were hoping he'd be up around the front of that rotation. And if they have to go to more depth, the current state of things, according to Dennis, you have knuckleballer Matt Waldron. He's had 3 scoreless rehab starts after having surgery in February. Right-hander Griffin Canning, returning from an Achilles rupture last June, could be an option later this month, so he's still a few weeks away. And then, of course, J.P. Sears, the other probably healthier option that could just plug in temporarily. I think you would imagine a scenario in which if Sears comes up, they're going to one of the other guys once the schedule allows them to do that, or in the case of Canning, once health permits him to be a big league starter again.
Yeah, I would assume that all 3 of those guys will be important this year because they represent the entirety of the Padres pitching depth. I also think that the Padres may need to make a decision off of Walker Buehler soon. But the nice thing about bringing up Waldron, if it works out, is that Waldron is a knuckleballer who's up to like 94 plus now with the fastball. So he's a type of pitcher we haven't seen a lot of. And I think especially against teams who've never seen him, I think he could be very effective. I think he could also be the type of guy that could put in 3 innings behind Walker Buehler 3 innings. Like he could sort of bounce around and, be a guy that pitches behind other guys, maybe doesn't need as much rest, but, he isn't throwing the knuckleball 100%. So it isn't kind of like, Dickey and some of Wakefield. Sometimes you would just take those guys on short rest because it didn't matter as much, but he's not quite like that because he has a full arsenal outside of the knuckleball. But I do think that you could probably use him for 3 innings every 3 or 4 days and plug some holes that are leaking at the back of that Padres rotation right now. So I would expect him to come up no matter what the news is on Pivetta pretty soon. I think his rehab runs out and he's out of options, so he's on his way. Waldron is coming, and he might be I think he's an interesting fantasy pickup in deeper leagues because of his unique arsenal, like I pointed out. But I don't know that I trust him yet. I want to see those velo readings for 5 innings in the major leagues, and I want to see how the other pitches grade out. And I'm not picking him up in 10 and 12s, and even in the NFC, I don't know. But I the one thing I worry about with Pivetta is like his incentives right now with his contract, where he can opt out after the season, is to maybe ignore some small pains and sort of pitch through it, quote unquote. And I hear from the team, like, they're like, well, we'll ask him how he feels tomorrow before we send it to imaging. If it was up to me, if it was my team, I would send him for imaging. I just wouldn't, I'd say this is the second time something like this has popped up. He was very final about it on the mound where he like threw a pitch and then he was out. And so I would say, just go to imaging, man. Like, let's just find out what this is. But we'll see what they do with it.
Yeah. In the event that he's got a long-term injury and doesn't have a path to use the opt-out at the end of this year, he has another one after 2027. The overall scope of the deal that he signed previously was 4 years and $55 million. There's a decent amount of guarantees still built in. So I do think in Pivetta's case, if he needs imaging, has imaging, it's revealed to he's got a serious problem, at least he's got some kind of coverage already in the form of that deal. So we'll see how this one plays out. You're right to call it out as a very unique situation. The other team that got rocked by injuries over the last few days, I would say, there's probably two, the Astros, where Tatsuya Imai ended up returning to Houston on Saturday to be examined by team doctors after dealing with right arm fatigue, this according to Chandler Rome of The Athletic. And then there was also this bit about Imai after the game intimating that the mound quality at T-Mobile Park in Seattle impacted his command, and that the weather he pitched in is not usual in Japan. This is all stuff he said through an interpreter, while adding that he was not able to adjust to that. Chandler pointed out in the story, first pitch temperature on Friday, 64 degrees with a slight breeze and an open roof in Seattle. Like, we know that it's kind of damp, kind of humid in Seattle, right? And what I've gathered is a lot of the stadiums in Japan are actually warm because they're closed up domes. So the on-field temperatures are considerably higher. All that is to say, Imai's honesty about what he was feeling in that start on Friday was not particularly well received by the masses.
No, kind of read as excuses maybe to some, and he's had such an up and down start, and there's been so many different opinions on it. It's been a rocky go. I did think he was going to be undervalued going in, and he did get a smaller contract than the big 6-figure numbers that were being bandied about. So there was there's something there, and then he had this first start, and then he had a really good start. And after the good start, everyone's throwing out images of his reverse slider. And, we talked about it here on the pod, but I resisted the urge to do a full breakdown on the reverse slider because he throws the slider that backs up. He throws a slider that has arm side movement instead of glove side movement. And, everyone sort of assumed that because it's so unique that it's good. And the thing that I worry about with things like this, I remember Joey Lucchese's curve, and we all talked about, hey, he has this curve that has changeup type movement, and like, what should we do with it? Or it's a changeup that has curve type movement, or whatever it was. I don't even remember anymore. And but I do remember a story that I was told that a team that was facing him was like, what do we do with this weird pitch? He's got this weird pitch. He's got this weird pitch. And the hitting coach said, don't think of it as a weird pitch. Think of it as a bad curve. Instead of thinking of it as a changeup that looks like a curve, just think of it as a bad curve. And they went out and hit him well that night. And I would assume that on some level with Imai, if you say, well, just think of it as a one-seam sinker. Think of it as a sinker that doesn't have a lot of like fade, just like a little bit less than just think of it as a bad sinker. You could go out there and be like, oh yeah, now this guy has a four-seam and a sinker, and he's not throwing a splitter at all. He's not throwing any other pitch at all. And if I just, focus in on this weird pitch, maybe I have the traject machine throw it to me, a few times, I'm going to see it eventually. And, Stuff never liked it. I thought the splitter would be better coming over. I just honestly think that he's droppable in 10 and 12 team leagues and in 15 team leagues, because if he starts this week, it's against Colorado at home. I'm just going to hold him on my bench and see what happens. Yeah, I don't trust him enough to throw him this week. I have 2 or 3 shares in 15 team leagues, and I'm putting them on my bench.
Yeah, the start in Seattle was 1/3 of an inning, 3 earned runs, 4 walks, no strikeouts. Just a brutal outcome for your ratios overall. But 11 walks in total over the 3 starts he's made so far in the big leagues. Even the really good start, 5 2/3 scoreless in West Sacramento against the A's, had the 9 Ks that day, had 3 walks also. So I think you're right.
And who started him in Sacramento?
Yeah, everybody would have been borderline on it, at least in shallow leagues. So I do think the shallow league approach is move on. I think the uncertainty in those deeper leagues about whether or not he's even going to pitch this week probably puts him on the bench. I would say the same is true of Pivetta, right? There's a chance he's fine, but more likely than not, he gets at least a slight delay, gets a little break before his next turn, and you don't know if he's 100% if he does take the ball. So in those situations, I'm always looking for that next guy up on the bench to slide in. It wasn't just Imai. Christian Javier left a start last week with a grade 2 shoulder strain. That's the same diagnosis as Hunter Brown. Neither of those guys has an official timetable. It's just going to be weeks before they resume throwing again, at least 2 at a minimum. So I just think the depth is being eroded quickly. The ceiling on a guy like Imai looks a little lower than we'd hoped, at least in the early going. And he also mentioned some struggles gripping Major League Baseballs, which, as we know, are slicker than the NPB pre-tacked balls in Japan. So just a lot of adjustments that need to be made for Imai, despite that glimmer back on the 4th of April against the A's.
That could be a little bit of hope for Imai, which is that he over time figures out how to command this pitch, because people pointed to his Japanese walk rate as not being that great, but what it was early troubles that really he ironed out over time. I mean, his last 3 years in Japan, he went from 11% to 10% to 7% in terms of the walk rate. And so if he follows that same trajectory here, maybe he over time gets command. Maybe he figures out how to command that splitter and becomes more of a 3-pitch guy and becomes a better pitcher later. He could even be a really deep league dynasty type pickup, if it's really cheap. But I'm way more down on him than I have been before.
The other Astros injury news that we're watching is Jeremy Pena left Saturday's game with what they're calling right posterior knee soreness. He did not play on Sunday. I would also put him in the try to avoid him in weekly leagues if you can sort of camp, because it's just one of those things that they may have to play a little bit conservatively here in the next few days.
They've scored, I think, the most runs in the big leagues in Houston and are 500, I believe. What are they? No, they're 6-10. So that tells you a little bit about their pitching struggles. And honestly, of all the teams that struggled out of the gate, even more than the Red Sox, I am worried about the Astros. Because Arrighetti, I like, and I'm actually putting Arrighetti in a lineup this week before the announcement, just hoping that they don't really have other choices. And so I'm hoping that Arrighetti comes up this week and gets a start at home against Colorado. Would be amazing. But Arrighetti is sort of the last man standing. JP France is up, a guy they DFA'd. That's how tough it is right now, pitching-wise in Houston.
There's one more team we'll get to before we dig into some prospects, and that's the Brewers, because Christian Yelich left Sunday's game with hamstring tightness, and the quote from Pat Murphy was not optimistic afterwards. He said, "We're most likely going to get some bad news," when talking about Yelich after that loss to the Nationals. And kind of piling on, I did see a report from Adam McKelvey leading into the weekend that Jackson Chourio still had not been cleared to hit, so he's not on the brink of starting a rehab assignment or getting back into the lineup. Andrew Vaughn's still down with a hamate injury. I think if I'm trying to calculate the most likely player that gets the call-up right now, because some people are going to say, well, are they going to call up Jesus Made? No, they're probably not going to do that, right? That's a big leap. They're probably going to bring up someone who's already in the 40-man. They're probably going to bring up someone who doesn't have a defensive position because Yelich mostly DHs. Do you know who that player is? It's Tyler Black. That's the guy they're most likely to bring up. So if you're looking for the super exciting prospect splashy call-up, I don't think that's where we're headed. I think if this requires an IL stint for Yelich, Tyler Black is my best guess for who they bring up to take that roster spot. And maybe he actually contributes for a couple of weeks given the current state of the depth chart.
I mean, you could make an argument for Jet Williams, but, Jet Williams hasn't started, his options clock or whatever, and he isn't hitting that well. Right now he has a 53 WRC plus. I don't know. I don't know how much that matters if you just feel like, oh, we just need his positional versatility, but you're right. He's replacing Christian Yelich. And, I think it would be weird to hey, Major League debut when you're not doing well. You kind of want people to debut when they're doing well. I think it's more of a psychological thing than saying, oh, well, he's batting 100 through 2 weeks, so he sucks. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it'd be weird to call a guy up who is batting 100 to be like, hey, the show. And you're like, now? Yeah, okay, I'm ready.
Let's make pitching more difficult for you now.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the strange part. Brock Wilkins, another name that I think some people are curious about. He's striking out 41% of the time through 13 games at Nashville, also kind of opening the season in a slump. I don't think they would go that route either. So I'm not expecting the exciting call-up. I think if you're looking at this Brewers lineup right now, it's trying to get more out of the guys that are currently in the mix, hoping to get some more from like Joey Ortiz and Luis Rengifo, who have not hit so far.
Are you worried about their closer?
Trevor Megill had a really bad inning defensively Friday night. Like the Nats bunted on him a couple of times and he was surprised. And just aside from that, the velo's still down a little bit compared to last year. Abner Uribe's velocity's down a little bit compared to last year. Jared Koenig is hurt. He's an important piece of the bullpen, not necessarily someone that's closer material. I'm worried about the bullpen as a whole. I think they have enough ways where you could say, yeah, the closer role could be in flux, but also their A bullpen might not be as crisp as it was throughout last season, and figuring out who's going to be elevated and who's going to be fixed and improved, like that is all going to be on the table here in these next few weeks. So level of concern, moderate with the Brewers right now, but they're going through it on the health front right now. I think that's a big part of why things turned so harshly for them over these last two series.
Yeah, there's a little bit something weird going on. 103 is about the average stuff plus for a reliever. That's what Megill has. His fastball has been below average in two of his appearances this year. And Abner Uribe's fastball has been below average by stuff plus in all of his appearances except for the last one. But overall, he's kept his head above water with a 106 stuff plus. So I think I would try and pick him up if he's available in the shallower leagues because they could make a change. I thought, Megill's fine, and this was just a bad inning because I saw some of the errors and said, this is just one of those innings where everything's falling apart around you. But you look underneath the hood, and it's not super exciting. Like both those guys have lost a little bit of stuff.
Yeah, frustrating because I think my read of how they were going to handle the ninth inning was right. They've used Megill like the guy up to this point, but the way he's pitching and the way he's looked, I think, have left that door wide open for a possible change. So I guess I'll give myself credit for process, even though it hasn't exactly worked out if Trevor Megill was your kind of discounted closer to this point in the season. We are going to hit a quick break. When we come back, we're talking prospects. To do it, we bring on Owen Riley and Maxfield Lane from Down on the Farm. Well, now it is our pleasure to be joined by Owen Riley and Maxfield Lane from Down on the Farm. You've probably seen that newsletter or you've seen them on socials. And we're talking prospects today because we have not talked a lot about minor leaguers during the season. Minor league season now underway across all of the full season levels. Owen, Maxfield, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here.
It's great to be here.
So I just wanted to start by asking you guys, how did you get into prospect analysis and what led you to start Down on the Farm in the first place? Just kind of give us the quick backstory if you can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So after, we both are college teammates. We both played college baseball at Carleton College at the Division III level. And, after our college career, we're always still into baseball, really into analytics. And as a way to, kind of stay in touch with each other, we decided to start Oyster Analytics. The big thing that we wanted to focus on by starting this analytics journey was we felt that a lot of other entities give a lot of predictions on players through ranks, which is good at seeing players relative to each other, but it's a little bit more difficult to extrapolate their overall career outcomes. And so what we wanted to do was, have a lot of complicated work on the back end, but keep it simple on that front consumer facing end where they can say, okay, based on the numbers, this is what these folks are predicting that someone's going to be a contributor at the major league level, a regular, or a star at the major league level. And so to help do that, which is something that Owen can talk a little more about, we decided to focus on relative stats at each level to show, how good players are doing at certain aspects of the game.
And I think that the key there, which I know you guys have talked about on the podcast before, is putting players in context based on their age relative to level, based on the run scoring environment of that level, based on the park effects where they're actually playing, and looking at that all together to get a better understanding of what hitting prospects really look like and what their likely career outcomes are in the show. And yeah, we've been doing that and writing for Down on the Farm now for quite a while, and it's a lot of fun.
In that process of because I know I've had a couple different touch points with your blog where I've been really impressed with some of your work, especially at the high minors when you've got the StatCast data for like AAA and stuff. I've seen some of your work on that. I don't think I realized you guys were Oyster Analytics too, because I've seen your work on the best times to challenge at the plate. I feel like you guys had some good work there where you showed that a lot of it is leverage. You want to do it late in games and with runners on and so on and so forth. But so I've run into you guys with the advanced analytics and with some of your research and really liked it, and that's part of why I've stayed in touch with y'all as a blog, but as a group. But in that process of kind of going through it, what are some of the tools that you look at the most? What are, like if you had a dashboard of stats, and maybe give me an idea of what that looks like at AAA and then at AA where you don't have some of those stats, or where you maybe some of it's intermittent, or you have it from some sources and you don't from others, or whatever it is. So what's your sort of dashboard of stats for minor leaguers when you're looking at them?
Yeah, so I think at AA, I'll start with the simpler one where you don't have that kind of StatCast data. Our dashboard is, obviously I'm going to plug our dashboard, but it is where we start, because we have that's where we have all of the park, league level, age adjusted stats and combine them all into projections about what players are going to look like at the MLB level, and also place players into archetypes that we've created. And from there, I think the big addition that we have is probably going to somewhere like Baseball America to get visual and video scouting reports to add into that, because one thing that we can't understand is, has a player been playing with a nagging injury? Has a player made an adjustment to their swing that the data hasn't caught up with yet? Or, also, especially on the defensive side, it's really tough to get reliable data, public data for that in the minor leagues. So making sure that we contextualize what we're doing with that is super important. Once we get up to the AAA level, then we really start to triangulate those stats that we have and the scouting reports from somewhere like Baseball America with a lot of that savant data to see if what we're seeing in the results-based data is backed up on the back end. And if it's not, it doesn't mean we're going to rule somebody out. Like we love in our modeling William Bergoya, who's his StatCast metrics are terrible by all accounts, right? He's like dead last in AAA, but he's somebody he's so good at just hitting the baseball that we're willing to overlook that. But I think we want to make sure that we're not saying that what we have is the one source of truth, and trying to get perspective from, the more old school methods, the most cutting edge methods, but also keeping in mind that what really matters at the end of the day is what the results on the field are. And so I think even when you're at the AAA level, keeping an eye on what the actual stats are for how guys are doing at the plate, it remains important. I don't know if Max, you had anything to add. I rambled for a little bit there.
No, I think you got it spot on. I think that one thing that the way our model works, it's essentially a random forest model, and it uses data since 2010 all the way through today to be able to project players. So one aspect that is not in that model is that, savant StatCast level data, because we don't have that publicly. We don't have that at all levels. What we do incorporate, though, at the AAA level is a breakout or bust score, where we look at players, StatCast metrics, and we say, okay, we may be high, we may be low on this guy, but this is what these numbers say, and maybe we're willing to bump them up or bump them down a little bit. One guy, for example, Ben Rice, was a guy that we were maybe a bit lower on than some, but he had a extremely high breakout score. He was killing it on the savant metrics. So when we said, okay, late bloomers are often pretty rare, but if there's going to be a guy who's going to bloom late, it's going to be somebody who's putting up savant numbers like this. So that's how we incorporate it, both public facing wise and also kind of how we deal with it internally.
Oh, I'm sorry to jump ahead of you, DVR. I did that just kicked something loose for me, though, because we talk about, if we're going to talk about specifics, let's talk about okay, one of the max EV maybe, right? And, or maybe barrel rate for a guy in AAA. And, you talk about contextualizing all your stats. How do you contextualize those? So would you give credit to somebody who's 19 or 20 would you look at their barrel rate and their max EVs differently and say, have you done an aging curve for these things? Have you seen that people add bat speed at any point? Because, when I look at the major leagues, it looks like you have bat speed and you just go down. But that's the problem is that that's the major leagues, and I'm not seeing that developmental phase. I'm not seeing those guys in AAA and AA. And I have to assume that you add bat speed. So do you contextualize those savant stats as well in that way?
Yeah, one thing I've just been working on this actually, and from what I can tell, you are seeing. I don't have bat speed data going back as far, but you are adding exit velocity as you go from that like 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. You're adding a little bit of exit velocity every year. You don't have so much data to work with on that because obviously there's a selection bias for who's playing in those leagues where that data is publicly available. But from what I can tell, you are seeing that increase, which makes logical sense, right? Like you're definitely a stronger player at 22 than you are at 18. I think when it comes to
I just remember when Churio came up, I was like, I don't know, the max EV is not that great. Barrel is not that great. And DVR was like, he's 20.
he's 20. He takes 99 out to like right center field. Like he's got plenty of power.
And that's exactly it from our standpoint is when we look at guys and their performances in A, high A, double A, our model really trends toward those guys who show good hit tools, keep the Ks pretty low, and is a little bit, not heads or tails on power. It does like power to some extent, but it's aware that it says, okay, striking out is something that tends to be stickier, and Owen did a fantastic project showing and proving that as a fact, where power is something that as you get older, it can come. It doesn't always come for guys, but it can. And especially when guys are showing good gap power, they're hitting doubles, they're getting triples. That's a sign that, as they, get their, what I call man muscles, they're going to start hitting home runs.
Like Kevin McGonigal was a great example of that. Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't have kept Tony Blanco.
He's awesome fun, to watch, though.
Yeah, you gotta love Tony Blanco.
We watched the Arizona Fall League home run derby and said, "Well, we got to keep him now."
No, it's awesome. Yeah. The fun factor is something that I think we need to find a way to work into our models because some guys are just awesome, like Chandler Simpson, right? Like our model doesn't love him, but like he's awesome. When he hits a ball in the right field and stands up a triple, hits the ball sign, like he's the guy.
Hasn't been a good first month for Eno's assessment of Chandler Simpson, but a lot of season, a lot of career to go still. So we'll see how it plays out. But I have that pull too, where it's like, if it's unusual, but it's fun, I want it to be true and I want it to be good. So I'm going to err on the side of maybe this will work. And, sometimes you just end up loud wrong in those cases, but at least you were on the side of fun. I do have one pitcher question for you. Max, Noah Schultz had patellar tendonitis last year. Context is everything. A lot of times minor league injuries are really like underreported. Only 73 innings. Walk rate went to the moon. It was double digits. The critiques I've seen of Noah Schultz is that he's got one great pitch and everything else is surprisingly hittable for a guy that's like a 6'10 lefty.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. He's debuting Tuesday, so a lot of fantasy players out there, especially in redraft leagues, have to make a decision about whether or not they want to add him or start him right away. But what do you think about his overall arsenal, his command, and what you've seen from him in his development through that White Sox system?
Yeah, I think, he's a very interesting prospect, especially from a fantasy standpoint, because I think, with fantasy pitchers, you can, in most leagues, afford to keep a lot on your bench. It's kind of similar to that Rule 5 philosophy where, it's a lot easier to get a pitcher and maybe you're in a league that lets you double start a guy and he gets good matchups and you can, slot him in there. Where for a hitter, it's a little more difficult. And Owen and I talked about this yesterday and this morning, just about as well how hitters, it takes a while for hitters to get adjusted to that big league level, right? They are facing pitching that is far better than anything they've ever seen, where pitchers, they are facing better hitters, but in a way they're kind of throwing the same stuff, right? The catcher's the same. You could treat them throwing to a 15-year-old the same way you could if they're throwing to Shohei. Right. That's how it works. But to speak more, specifically on Schultz, I think, it's difficult to see a guy, suffer an injury and then have the numbers go down. But I think, the big thing this season is he's not walking guys. Right. And if he can keep that, and that's something that's been consistent, right? It's not like he's a guy who, has consistently walked people and, all of a sudden has found the zone in this small sample size where, maybe you'd be skeptical. But I think with Schultz, you see a guy that, is getting back to what he did before. And for me, I think that would make me feel a lot more comfortable. And I think, even though he just does, have, he's not as, he doesn't have as many great pitches as some other top standout pitchers, but the fact that upside is there would make me for sure want to pick him up in fantasy. He's a guy that could be great.
He's also somebody who has a lot of time to add pitches, right? I think we've seen that especially in recent years as the research has gotten so much better on understanding how important pitch mix is, that guys, once they understand how their arsenal plays at higher levels, are able to go in an off season and change their arsenal or add to their arsenal. So I think that that's not something that would be a red flag for me, because it's not set in stone forever.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because also, I don't know how many of these he's going to bring with him to the major leagues, but in AAA, he did throw 6 different pitch types. And so even if those aren't great pitches, he's throwing them in AAA and he can refine those. And I think that's a better look at, somebody, than somebody who's dominating AAA with 2 or 3 pitches. At least he's throwing these guys. And I see the curve in our model, the Stuff Plus model, the curve looks dominant. And it has good splits for platoons. So he's got a secondary against both guys. He's got a pretty good cutter. And the four seam and sinker may not be the best pitches in the world, but I think they'll be at least around average. And so that's a pretty good arsenal, especially if he can command it. And I'd like that context you bring up with the patellar tendonitis last year being a problem for him when it comes to commanding. I mean, that's the landing foot is a huge deal.
Yeah.
When you're doing that stuff. Who are some names? Why don't you? Well, I'll let you highlight some guys that you guys want to highlight. But then after that, I'm going to ask you, who might come up and make an impact this year that's still in the minors, because I feel like we know all the pitching ones. We know that they're going to come up. Hitting, sometimes the teams pick boring guys instead of the impact guys because they're just, we just need a guy for 2 weeks or whatever. But, so it's hit or miss. And I don't want to wait all year for Bryce Eldridge if it's not worth it. So I'm going to ask you guys after this, after you highlight some guys you wanted to highlight, tell me some guys that maybe might come up and be an impact this year for redraft players.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, I will take the bait and start with guys that we're obsessed with right now. So Pedro Ramirez is a guy that I really wanted to talk about here, especially because we're on Rates and Barrels, and he has been having really good rates at just about everything so far in AAA. His exit velos have been really, really strong. This is a guy he's a second baseman, third baseman in the Cubs organization in AAA. In terms of immediate impact, it's going to be tough for him because that Cubs infield is pretty loaded, and I don't think any of those guys are going anywhere anytime soon. But long term, he's somebody who's been underrated, I think, for a long time, partly because he's small. He's 5'9". He doesn't look like a guy who's going to, hit the cover off the baseball. But so far in 2026, he really is. Of guys who are under 26 playing in AAA, he's almost in the top 10 in EV90 so far this year, which is really impressive considering he's only 22 and he's that size and he can play the infield.
And he has a 5% swing strike rate.
Yeah, and his hit tool has always been there, and people have taken note of the hit tool, but they've always projected him as like a 40 power guy on the 20 to 80 scale, and that's clearly just not the case anymore. This guy, he's still, I think, got a little bit of time to even improve that exit velocity number a little bit more. He hits the ball all the time, and he hits it really hard. I think the challenge for him is going to be to get it in the air and into the outfield. He's hitting a lot of infield fly balls at the moment. That's something that you see a decent amount, though, among guys who are a little bit young for the level, who are getting a little overmatched at some points by pitching. So I'm pretty in on him. We have him as a really good contact hitter with above average power, and that seems ambitious for a guy who nobody has talked about. But I think he's proving so far that it's legit. So he's a guy that I really want to keep an eye on right now. Max, you want to highlight somebody else?
Absolutely. Another guy who we were very high on going into the season, who we really didn't see much of anything from anybody else on, this guy who's now taken over at a small extent in the big leagues, is Diamondbacks' Jose Fernandez. He was a player who got a lot of hype early in his career as a potential, tool shed level prospect. Baseball America said and this was in 2022, those willing to dream see the frame and the tools of a modern day middle of the lineup shortstop. we had him ranked 57th overall, which was much, much higher than everybody else going into the season. And I don't think we expected him really to take over the big leagues as quickly as he has, but he's been really fantastic. A guy who's capable of playing multiple infield positions. He's not exactly a wizard with the glove. He's not like a long-term shortstop type, but, he can hold his own there right now. He's played mostly first and third, and DH so far in the big leagues. The thing with him is he fits into that same mold as Pedro Ramirez, where last season he had that big bump in power. He had 17 home runs, in Double-A Amarillo, which is a big home run environment, but he was able to do it striking out only 20.4% of the time. And very few guys, regardless of the environment, are able to keep the Ks down, keep the contact at a level that's civil, and then also still hit for power. So he was someone who, again, he was on that upward trajectory where in prior years, he had not had a year with a WRC plus over 100. He didn't even have one last year when it was at 98, but you saw all those underlying numbers, the ones that really predict well, start to swell up and up and up. And those are the guys for us that, we're really high on compared to other outlets. We start to see those things going in a positive direction, even if the on-field results aren't exactly there yet.
We haven't talked about him enough on our pod, actually. And, one thing that's kind of cool is, from a major league standpoint, is just seeing that 75-mile-an-hour bat speed, along with, a 12% swing strike rate and a history of making contact. I feel like he's still under-projected. If you look at the projections, nobody has him for better than a 140 isolated slugging. And there's not a lot of guys who have a 75-mile-an-hour bat speed and have a, below average power in the big leagues. So I would say it looks like Carlos Santana's kind of toasty and they're looking for, an everyday bat. I think he might just take this and run with it.
Yeah. And I think that's the crazy thing is that when you see these guys that are, all those stats are building up, that's what can happen, right? A guy gets that power surge, starts, puts on muscle, boom. All of a sudden that if they're able to maintain the contact that made them a respectable player at the lower levels of the minors, now all of a sudden they're the real deal. I mean, you saw that with McGonigal where he was, kind of a slap happy contact guy with some walks, and then he put on some power and then everything was going everywhere, hitting home runs, hitting doubles. Now he's, number 2 overall prospect. Like that's what can happen when guys add power.
I want to ask you guys about Blaze Jordan, a prospect that I believe Chaim Bloom drafted in Boston and is now acquired in St. Louis. What do you see? Do you see a surefire, everyday big leaguer? Do you see an underrated prospect? Because as you mentioned, a little polarizing in some circles.
Yeah. I'm always trepidatious to talk about Blaze Jordan because people have strong opinions. But we've been, I'll just stick with what our research has told us, which is that we've been fans for a long time. And I think that the thing that shines through for him and has kept our model on board is the fact that he's had plus contact and plus power at high levels of minor league baseball. And yet there's concerns around that, but that core is something that not a lot of guys do. So in our model going into this season, there was only one other player in our model that we had scored as 1 standard deviation or better than average in avoiding strikeouts, in contact, and in home run power. And that was Kevin McGonigal. So Kevin McGonigal and Blaze Jordan, the only 2 that fell into that category. That's good company to be in. Of course, the concerns with him are that, he chases a lot. That's something that people are concerned about going into Major League Baseball. Right now, he's getting away with it. I saw him hit a home run on a pitch that was almost going to bounce the other day, and he flicked it out over the left center field wall, which is pretty crazy. But, will he be able to do that in Major League Baseball? I don't know. We'll see. But I think the fact that he's able to have, I think right now he's above 75th percentile in exit velocity and above 75th percentile in basically whatever contact metric you want to use. And that's a pretty rare combination, even for a guy who, he's probably stuck at first base in the major leagues. And I don't know how he's going to fit in with the Cardinals this year, but I think he's got the tools to be deserving of a shot in the majors sooner rather than later somewhere. And I think we think that he is going to be a guy who's going to get regular playing time eventually and make an impact.
Yeah, I think, as a person who's overweighted chase rate myself in the past, I think when you see this kind of contact, even if he's chasing, that's something you can worry about when he's 30. Until then, it seems like he can make contact on these pitches, and maybe he'll struggle a little. Maybe he'll be streakier than people want with an aggressive approach like that. But if he's making contact, more than 10, his swing strike rates are below 10%, and his strikeout rates are 11 to 12%. Like I can't say that the approach is not working for him.
Yeah. I think that's something we've seen a little bit too with another guy we like, Jadher, Areinamo for the Rays. Is some teams get a little bugged out by that.
What's his name? What was that name again?
Jadher Areinamo.
Yeah, how do you spell that?
Jadher. That's what we know.
There you go.
Areinamo. I think I got that. Yeah.
No,
Nice.
no ding for you at the spelling bee. You got that one. But he's a guy, we've loved him for a long time. He's another tiny, pretty small player, good infielder, swings it a lot. And one of the issues that I think kind of got him traded from the Brewers, he went from the Brewers to the Rays in a trade. And so I think, they weren't, what we heard is that they weren't pleased with his hyper-aggressive approach, right? He swings at a lot of pitches. There's chase there, but there's a lot of contact. And I think we feel the same way, where guys that chase, if they're making contact, they can mitigate a lot of the negativity there. And especially if they have that little bit of punchy power, whether it's home run power or doubles power, they can run into enough to be able to sustain it. Even though they're not taking as many walks as some people would like, they're able to avoid the strikeouts. And if they're avoiding ground balls and avoiding infield fly balls, the other two kinds of, poor contact, if they're able to make those, high BABIP possibility contacts as much as possible, they can produce, right? It's like they're working from a bigger base of chances to get on base. It's
more lottery tickets.
Yes,
Putting more
exactly.
tickets out there.
Well, before we let you guys go, let our listeners and viewers know where they can follow you and your work overall.
Yeah, so the best place to follow us is on our Substack, Down on the Farm. We publish weekly research content, or bi-weekly research content, as well as daily player reports and all kinds of information to follow and track your minor league prospects. We're also on Down on the Farm 12 on Twitter, so Down on the Farm 12 on Twitter, as well as Down on the Farm on Blue Sky as well.
Excellent. Maxfield,
Thanks,
Owen,
guys.
thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time and your insight.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Thanks so
Great to
much
be
for
on.
having us.
We have to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll take a look at where the money went in weekly fantasy leagues this weekend. Welcome back to Rates and Barrels. I wanted to talk about a couple of players that were popular pickups over the weekend because they didn't get a lot of shine going into the weekend on our waiver show. Angel Martínez has broken the 12-team league barrier. I'm basing this on RotoWire Online Championship behavior. It's really interesting because Martínez is a prospect that I've liked for a long time. I was tipped off to him by Jason Panini, I think of Prospects Live several years ago. Jason's been a scout, worked for a few different organizations over the years. And I think the thing I liked about Martínez this year is I was watching a few random Guardian spring games where they were prioritizing getting him playing time. And we saw last year the versatility, playing center field, qualifies as a second baseman as well. So from a deep league fantasy perspective, back during draft and holds, he was a great late pick because if you saw any path to a half season's worth of plate appearances, you could at least get him in somewhere when injuries picked apart your lineup. Now we're talking about him as someone that people are choosing to add in 12-team leagues. What do you think it is about him that's getting people to buy in?
I think it's the idea that maybe you could get batting average and power and speed, maybe not a ton of each of them, but the sort of a tantalizing pairing of skills. And then in the context of what we just heard from the Down on the Farm guys, it's interesting to see that he is a chaser. He has, I would say, bottom tier plate discipline. When we talk about zone minus reach rate, 40 is a good number. He has a 20. I've very rarely seen numbers that low. And even last year, it was only 25. So he's not going to give you good plate discipline, but he does make contact on everything. And he is that kind of player that they were just talking about where they can make it work, if they and I didn't say this with them, but this is I think the thing that kind of makes it a little bit nauseating is that they're a little bit BABIP dependent. Right? Because you're thinking about like, how do you get a good batting average and a good OBP with these set of skills? Well, you put the balls in play and you kind of get a little lucky on those balls in play. If he has a 270 BABIP like he had the last couple of years, then he has a 230 batting average and he has a sub 300 OBP, and then he's not going to be at the top of the lineup. Right now he has a 340 BABIP, and he has a 383 OBP and he's at the top of the lineup, right? So there is some risk here where you might be getting a 230 hitter. What I see though is the bat speed went up a little bit, the max EV went up a little bit, the barrel rate went up a little bit. This could be exactly what they're talking about, as a young guy coming into his power at 24 years old. So I do think he's probably a pickup where you're just waiting to see if that bat speed holds, if the barrel rate holds, if he can have a 320 BABIP this year and be a productive guy who hits maybe 250 with a 320 OBP, and could get you to 15, 20 even maybe.
Right. There's enough power and speed there. There's enough opportunity. He's been playing mostly left field, a little bit of right field. The one thing that caught my eye looking at the Guardians schedule, and I think I heard this during the Sunday night broadcast, I think this was a Jason Benetti nugget, the Guardians have seen a lot of lefties so far this year. Martínez is, I think, the kind of guy that, because he switch hits, you can talk yourself into him playing every day, but the initial usage has been a little lighter against the righties they've seen. So if you look back at the last 6 games, like the last week essentially, they saw 4 left-handed starters. So Martínez started against all the lefties, and he started against the one righty. So 5 in a row, big up arrow. I like the fact that he hits high in the order now, too. We've seen him lead off. That was Sunday night. We've seen him hit second in the order for, I think, 5 of his starts so far this year. I think where it gets dicey is when you start thinking about Martínez versus someone you brought up as a drop on Friday in shallow leagues, and Marcus Semien, because in my mind, I'm like, Semien's going to keep playing. With Martínez, he can play his way out of the job. If he's too aggressive, if the Ks come up and the walks come down, he could lose his share of the job very quickly.
If he plays to his projections, he could lose his playing time. I mean,
right.
Oopsie and the Bad X have 80, 85 WRC plus. That's not going to play. They need better than that.
Yeah. So I do think the leap of faith it takes for players like this requires you to make some mistakes with the drop in some cases. Like if you're getting as high as Semien for a drop, that can backfire on you. I understand why you like Martínez overall. If you picked him up, I liked him too. I'm just a little bit cautious about the number of lefties they've seen, because that will eventually die off a little bit. They will not see as many lefties every week as they just saw in this past one. I did see some other hitters that were picked up in a lot of 12-team leagues, probably for more streaming purposes than anything else with this group. Jesus Sanchez, Mauricio Dubon, like eventually Ha-Seong Kim comes back. Dubon will play less once that happens. Josh Bell kind of seems fringy to me as a corner guy in a 12-team league. Troy Johnston in Colorado. I think when the Rockies are home, he's in. I think when the Rockies are on the road, he's not as in for me, so it's harder to keep him in the lineup. This is a split week. One series of each this week.
Extremely injured like I am, I have to play him on the road. But the 2 names that jump off of that list for me, you didn't quite get him. Jorge Soler, who it's just an awkward time. Some people, he's been on waiver wires. I just lost him in Barf. I bid 112 or 115, and he went for 152, and I feel dumb. I mean, I think I maybe should have gone. I might regret that. But anyway, I can see why he's on some waiver wires with his suspension coming. But Jorge Soler and Jesus Sanchez are must-owns in all leagues for me. I mean, maybe not 10. They're maybe a little bit in 10-teamers. You can probably find other guys. But, Sanchez is a guy who's always had the bat speed, always had the contact. And I've always been waiting for him to break out. This is probably one of the friendlier stadiums he's ever hit in. And, I think he's at least going to get the 2/3 of the playing time. And now with some injury there, with George Springer hurt, I feel like he might play every day for the next couple of weeks too.
Yeah, I think that eases some pressure. The lineup adjustment, we saw Ernie Clement move to the leadoff spot. He has started every game so far this year, and it was Eloy Jimenez getting the run as the DH on Sunday. I think the good news for the Jays and all that, with that Springer injury, it may only be a 10-day minimum situation, according to Mitch Bannon. So at least if you lost Springer, it may be a situation where you get him back by the end of April. Adley Rutschman went on the IL this weekend, too. So I was trying to figure out if there was actually a pickup worth making there. And what I saw was Semi Basayo caught Saturday and Sunday. The injury is ankle inflammation, so that also doesn't sound horrible, at least as it's reported right now.
I'm holding on to him and Gabriel Moreno, who both got hurt in 2 catcher leagues. I think they're too good. You can't in 2 catcher leagues. In 1 catcher leagues, maybe you can move on. I don't know.
Neither one of the injuries sounds like it's going to be a long enough absence where you want to let them go and deal with the guy you picked up off the wire as a longer-term replacement in a 2-catcher league. In a single-catcher league, I could see the case for maybe cutting either one of them because the quality of that replacement might be close enough where you're not actually giving that much up. But yeah, Moreno's injury is a back injury, so they were using, I think, they can't. Adrian Del Castillo is not really a catcher, right? Like that's not a
I think
thing.
James
McCann's going to get most of the playing time.
Yeah.
And then they're actually in a situation right now where Corbin Carroll's been dinged up, but he was at least DHing over the weekend. The other drops, ads, that kind of stuff that was interesting to me, I thought Jakob Junis getting picked up for pretty big bids was interesting just because
I didn't pay the bids. I don't trust it.
I don't trust it either. So I just wanted to bring it up and say, what's the real, what's the disconnect? Why are some people still throwing big bids at Jakob Junis if we truly don't believe, right? It's 8 innings so far this year, hasn't allowed an earned run. It's only 6 Ks. We've seen him in the bullpen for the better part of, 3 years now? I mean, I think he made 6 starts in 2024, but he's basically just a reliever at this point. And the K rates have been low 20% the entire time. It's a good walk rate. So maybe it works in a different kind of way. It's just so far from what we normally want out of a closer. How do you think we're going to be talking about Jakob Junis at First Pitch Arizona in November? Are we going to be talking about Jakob Junis?
If he somehow gets finishes the season with 20 saves and a mid-3s ERA and, people are like, oh, will he be the closer next year? I'll say no. Because I don't even think he'll be the closer the rest of this season. Honestly, like a 23% strikeout rate is average for the big leagues. For closers, it's like 26, 27. He's got a 21. It's just, and then, we have research that suggests that, closers usually come with great fastball velocity. He's 91.9. And the average stuff plus for a closer is like 106, 107, and he's at 90. So I just don't see it happening. I tried to put some interesting backup bids on Cole Winn, whose stuff has been up recently as he is taking to being a full-time reliever. I think he kind of had one foot in each bin for a little bit. And I think that, with him, 23% strikeout rate, 98 stuff plus, that's trending up. I think he's the guy, 95 on our fastball. I think he's the guy long-term, unless Robert Garcia finds his command. So, I was doing smaller backup bids on other players, and I was trying to get Winn, so I got a couple shares of Winn. I'm debating a trade for Robert Garcia in an AL only. I don't know. I just don't. I'm betting against Junis myself.
I did too. I think I made one very light attempt to add him on my own and one in a co-managed situation. It's really a wide arsenal, good command approach, which we just don't normally see in those.
But I don't even know if it's a wide
spots.
arsenal, good command. Like, I don't know if I trust that all those pitches are good. The slider is the thing. He's like a slider guy. He's got a really good slider.
It's just weird that with the change, the four seam, and the sinker, like especially the sinker and the change, they look so much alike that I think it helps the fastball play up a little bit. But it's such a weird thing to see for a high leverage reliever. I gotta get past the weird if I'm going to get into Jakob Junis. The Rangers news of the weekend was that Wyatt Langford actually had some right quad tightness that popped up. He left early Friday night, did not play Saturday or Sunday, so that's a tough call in weekly leagues if we don't get some kind of indication pre-lock if he's good to go to start off the week for the Rangers.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with that one. There's what was the other person who had a slight quad strain and was available Sunday and is not maybe going on the IL. Man, the IL has just been so Tyler O'Neill with the concussion, and there's so many of my players are hurt right now. So many players are hurt.
It's a lot of injuries. The good news, I guess, if there is, we were wondering about Cole Reagans at the end of the week with that comebacker he took to the thumb, still listed as the starter for that game Tuesday against the Tigers. Unless we hear something Monday before lock, I think I'd be in on that start for Reagans. Cautiously optimistic, coming off of our conversation with Trevor May about that one. It does look like Tommy Pham's coming back to help the Mets' struggling offense, which I don't think that's going to be the cure. I think the cure is about 1 week away. According to Tim Britton, Juan Soto could return for the start of the Mets' next homestand. That's Tuesday, April 21st. So good news if you got Juan Soto, maybe only a week away from getting him back. And then with all the injuries, all the guys we've lost, we do have Merrill Kelly coming off the IL. Good for deep league help. He's supposed to come back Tuesday in Baltimore, make his first big league start of the season. It looks like Brandon Pfaadt is the one who's going to be the odd man out in the rotation, that according to Nick Picoro of the Arizona Republic. And this is partially because Mike Soroka's been really good so far this year.
Yeah, and Pfaadt hasn't really been able to put it together. He has one good pitch, but you know, his struggle against lefties continues. There's some deep pickups that may become relevant for shallower leagues going forward. Is Cade Povich and Javier Assad are both guys that I think we've talked about a little bit, but I like them. And Povich has that, you know, despite the bad velo and mediocre stuff, he's a lefty with good command, and I keep thinking that there's going to be a way that he can put his pitches together that will lead to a little mini breakout. So I think he's got a little bit of runway on that staff right now. And same for Javier Assad, where it's a slightly new pitch mix, more velo, and a team that just frankly needs him. You know, losing Cade Horton, losing Matt Boyd, you know, and having Colin Ray in that rotation, I think Assad might keep it. JT Ginn is interesting. His best pitch is a sinker, though, and he pitches in Sacramento, so I think that is a deep league situation.
Yeah, I found most of the bats people were adding this weekend to be generally underwhelming, so it was a very inactive week for me on the waiver wire. It was mostly just patching up a couple of holes with injuries, but not really throwing any big bids at anyone, which is maybe a good thing, right? Like, save that fab, save it for later, make smaller additions along the way. Don't try to throw the big hammer in April and try to salvage your season with the Hail Mary sort of pickup. We are going to go on our way out the door. Reminder, you can join our Discord with the link in the show description. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to hit that subscribe or follow button so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed it, drop us a like, leave a rating, or sound off in the comments. We'll see you next time.